on it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, before it says 8:01, we will just start. Welcome to our webinar on the book, Being Smart About Gifted Learning. This book has been a while in the making, and Gifted Unlimited and the authors, Dr. Dona Matthews and Dr. Joanne Foster, are thrilled to be able to be here tonight live in real time to discuss and answer some of your questions about the book itself, an optimal match, just a couple of housekeeping kinds of things. If you have questions, please ask them in the chat. And I will try to follow those. And as we had a number of questions come through with registration, so I'll be asking some questions, and then toward the end, I'll run through the chat and see what other questions our discussion may have elicited. Let's see, we will go for about 45 minutes. We kind of felt like that with it being various time frames, and it's getting kind of late for some families and households, and it's getting toward dinner time for others, we would try to respect that 8 to 8:45 time frame. So without further ado, I give you Dona and Joanne and their wonderful book, Being Smart About Gifted Learning. And there's glare on there, but you've probably seen it on the internet. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do either of you care to say anything sort of by way of introduction before we dive into questions, or should we just jump in?
We're glad to be here and really happy to say hello to everybody who's participating. I'm looking forward to this evening and to any further conversations we'll have about these ideas that Joanne and I think are pretty important.
Exactly. And if I can just add something, I'd like to invite people to keep in touch with us after the fact, that if they have questions or they have comments about the book, Dona and I are lifelong learners, and we're always happy to continue conversations that may start this evening.
Wonderful. No, you all are probably up there in the top 5% as far as people who are accessible. So I am, you're easy to reach, and you're open to talking and communicating with people, which is great. So optimal match, which is the feature of your all's book, has received a lot of attention lately between news and op-ed pieces and Psychology Today, blogs and that type of thing. So I am really excited to kind of hear it from the horse's mouth. I've read the book a couple of times, but it's always wonderful to sort of see it come to light from the author. So what just to jump in, what do reviewers mean by an inclusive new approach to gifted education? And I feel like this is so important, especially right now as we look to New York, California, Virginia, and who knows who else will be following in those footsteps.
Yeah, we call it an optimal match approach because it's all about matching a child's learning opportunities with their abilities. Very simply, it's finding the best match for each child. So if a child is advanced in one area or another compared to other kids their age, they need some kind of acceleration or enrichment or something else, a different form of learning that matches their abilities. What that means in practice is the need for a wide range of learning options in order to match that wide range of individual developmental differences. So it's inclusive for a number of reasons. Number one, it includes kids with many kinds of gifted learning needs, as well as kids with learning differences and other exceptionalities, including kids with multiple exceptionalities. So it's based on the research on neuroplasticity, showing that intelligence develops in every child with opportunities to learn in a context of interest and motivation. So a lot of people who want to make sure, who believe in gifted education, who want to make sure advanced learners have their needs met, people who recognize the need for gifted education, have trouble with the designation gifted. that can be very problematic. One of the great features of optimal match is it's non-categorical. From an optimal match perspective, there's no such thing as gifted, and there's certainly no such thing as not gifted. Nobody ever is not gifted. This approach incorporates the growth mindset. It shows that having a gifted identity often causes problems for people. It's healthier in the long run to see oneself as always learning, to recognize that problems and setbacks are inevitable. So it avoids, this optimal match concept avoids tying people into an identity as gifted. So it's flexible, it's dynamic, it's way more inclusive across race, across culture, across every form of difference among people, because you're looking for individual learning needs that need to be met. So it's not about giving a kid a label. It's not about giving them a test that may not be culture fair. So more inclusive in every way. It incorporates a whole lot of it's built on a foundation of all the models of gifted instruction, the school-wide enrichment model, the integrated curriculum model, differentiated instruction, all of the approaches to providing learning opportunities for kids who have gifted learning needs.
Thank you so much. I feel like that along the way, one thing that I kept hearing in all of my reading over the numerous years I've been doing this is that idea that while not all children are gifted necessarily, there is the fact that what is good for gifted ed is really good for everybody, because it has to do with tailoring that learning experience to the individual needs of any given student. And what could be better? You're going to meet everyone's needs across the board and in a realistic way. So thank you for that. Joanne, subtitle of your book is Empowering Parents and Kids Through Challenge and Change. And Lord knows we've had a lot of that over the last 10 or 18 or so months, 2 years to 18 months. How can parents, especially right now with things still being in such flux as far as wearing masks, not wearing masks, things are sort of turbulent, travel is a little weird, school's a little different. How can parents and families help offer their children an environment of safety and trust to sort of create that in this kind of interesting time in which we find ourselves?
Right. It is a time of challenge and change, and roles are a lot more complex. Whether you're a parent, a student, a teacher, an administrator, there are changing policies and changing comfort levels and different expectations and perspectives and experiences and connections. And at home, at school, technologies have changed. Everything seems to be in flux, and there's a lot of uncertainty and vulnerability as well. There was a psychologist by the name of Roberto Assagioli who said that there is no certainty, there is only adventure. And so I think if we look towards these times as a time of adventure, a time to open ourselves up to possibility and to be reassuring at the same time, that makes a huge difference for families. I think parents and kids alike have to sit and reflect a little bit as to what they're struggling with, what kind of resources they can get to help with whatever struggles they may have. And to even take a look at gifted education and the kinds of learning opportunities that are being offered and see how those have changed and how those may be even improved further. So in terms of this optimal match that Donna was referring to, the first, perhaps most important thing to do in a time of challenge and change is to stay attuned to where your child is at, what their interests are, how they're feeling, making sure that they have an environment where they feel safe, where they have someone who they trust that they can go to in terms of telling them about their preferences, their choices, their interests, their concerns, all of that, their feelings, any gaps that they may be experiencing in their learning, so that they need that safe place. Parents can also demonstrate their own coping mechanisms, what it is that they do in order to make sure that the road is as smooth as possible, to help children understand that change is inevitable, that we all have change. It's part of our daily lives, and transitioning is just something that everybody has to do. And that we need to show children that we have faith in their abilities to meet with these challenges and changes, by honoring their ideas, honoring their curiosity, their deliberations, their decisions, and knowing too that they feel that they can come to you as a parent or a teacher or whatever to help them if they do find the road a little rocky.
Those are all wonderful suggestions, and I think especially the modeling, the coping mechanisms, because hopefully the adults in the household have sort of found their way to
Right.
doing that. I think discussing those things with your children is really important, to the extent that it's developmentally appropriate. You don't want to frighten them too much, but to say, you know, I share that feeling and this is how I dealt with it. So I think that's wonderful. So we have some children, depending on where in the world you live and function. We have some students who are back at school after months of being virtual. And thank goodness that we've been able to do this. You know, 30 years ago, I don't know what we would have done as far as school went. So I'm grateful for the virtual component, but I know that there is a lot of anxiety. I went to a conference, small conference, only a couple hundred people for the first time, and I was a little uneasy. It was just, I was overpeopled when I got home. I kind of, you know, took a long nap. It was a lot. And so I'm thinking, if I, as a middle-aged adult, feel that way, our children returning to school, the actual brick and mortar school building, must be feeling that way. What do you advise? What do you have to offer parents who are concerned about bullying, conflict management, or just that anxious feeling of, wow, I'm around all these people again?
Yeah, I mean, you're so right. I think adults, you know, as your story describes or illustrates, we've become rusty and tentative in our social skills, anxious about the encounters and the situations that we used to find relatively easy. You know, if we're lucky, we used to find those things relatively easy, but even those who found it easy are finding it a little difficult now. So for some children, that unease translates into being aggressive or into behaving as a bully. So we are going to be seeing a lot of manifestations of aggression and problems in our schools and schoolyards and in social settings that kids are getting involved in. For some kids, it shows up as being more aggressive, that anxiety and worry. For other kids, it means behaving in ways that might attract bullying. So kids are nervous and they stay away from others, or they're too friendly or too pushy. So it's very normal to be overreacting and underreacting and having concerns and issues with social circumstances. So yes, it's a time when parents do need to pay particular attention to their kids' feelings and their social experiences. One of the things a parent can do is pay attention to supporting the child's sense of confidence and social competence. So the best way for a person to feel comfortable with others is to feel comfortable with yourself, obviously. Another good thing for a parent to do is to help your child realize that a lot of other kids are having trouble too. Because when we're socially anxious, a really good way of overcoming that is focusing on what others are experiencing. So taking the self-consciousness away, moving to an other consciousness. So supporting your child in being intentional in doing that, in observing themselves in interactions and paying more attention to other people's experience. So it is a really good time to think about active kindness and empathy, and supporting your child in thinking, you might want to do something. I did with one of my kids when we were having some issues, and she began doing a daily mitzvah. She began looking for an opportunity to do something good for somebody that was completely unsolicited, unrewarded. It was just out of the goodness of her heart. And it was so good. It helped her feel good about herself. So that's a really nice tool. You might want to look for opportunities depending on your child's age. Well, probably across most ages, for one-on-one play dates, because kids can manage way better one-on-one than in groups. I mean, humans are like that. We tend to be a lot more comfortable one-on-one than in groups. So looking for opportunities for that. And if there are COVID concerns, obviously you want to pay attention to doing it outside if you can, or looking for ways to sort of mitigate the risk. So so those are some of the ways to sort of help your kid manage the social situation today.
No, that helps. That really helps so much because as you say, the adults have gotten a little rusty. I think a lot of our students are running back to school because a lot of them are really happy to be there, and then kind of get there and it's like, whoo, because they've gotten a little rusty too. Although I think that they probably will adapt quicker than we do because they tend to be a little more flexible.
And I'd like to add one more thing that you reminded me of in your description of what happened when you went to the conference. Another thing we should be doing with kids for social reasons, emotional reasons right now is paying real attention to giving them time out, not time out in a punitive way, but time off. So more time for rest, maybe fewer extracurricular activities, depending on what's going on for them. But, and this is a terrible thing to say, but maybe they need more time on screens, more alone time, but looking for ways to respect their needs to back away from the social world and the demands of the social world. Because it's hard. It takes a lot of energy to handle the social experience of school anytime for a child, but when they haven't had it, for some of them, it's been a year and a half. So.
No, thank you so much. It makes sense. We at our house, we refer to it as downtime, and it's just, time to, it's not punitive, but just time to sort of process and recharge a little bit, whatever works best for you. Could be a walk, could be reading a book in a hammock, lots of options. So thank you for that. I did notice in reading your all's book a couple of times that you focus so much on creativity and the role of creativity in gifted learning. And I would love to hear a little bit more about that. You explain it beautifully in the book, but it would be nice to hear it from you.
I'm happy to answer that question. And I think the importance of creativity is that it helps children become open to possibilities and find new ways to confront challenges, new opportunities for fun and excitement, enables them to explore different kinds of expression, whether it's music, art, drama, or something else totally. It enables them to reframe their thinking as well, to look at things through a different lens. Creativity is something we carry with us all the time. It's like having a superpower, but it's a choice. You have to decide that you're going to be creative. Otherwise, that superpower is just going to be there and not energize and not invigorate in the ways that it could. Creativity doesn't necessarily come easily, so it requires effort. It requires resourcefulness and inquiry. Parents need to reinforce and praise along the way when children do exhibit creative expression. It develops over time with suitable learning opportunities and challenges and support, so much like intelligence, which also develops in that way. Often creativity is built from what you already know. So you start with a certain knowledge base, and then you try different things, you experiment, you take sensible risks, you go off in different directions and you broaden your horizons, and it becomes a whole new way of looking at things. And since we were talking about challenge and change earlier, I think creativity is an important tool. It's an important tool for parents in terms of their parenting strategies. And it's also an important tool for children as they learn to cope with some of the difficulties that they encounter, whether it's COVID related, whether it's something else. So in chapter 2 of Being Smart About Gifted Learning, we talk a lot about creativity. We talk about some of the difficulties children have, how parents can help children who might be struggling. And also we talk about ways to enhance creativity. So different ideas for helping children to become more creative, encouraging spontaneity and wacky ideas and sophisticated ideas and so many different ways. So again, I encourage people to read chapter 2 and then to apply it to some of the optimal match ideas that we discuss further on in the book.
Thank you so much, Joanne. It's again, chapter 2 does a wonderful job, but it's always nice to hear it, I think. Sorry about that. So moving on to still related to COVID, but what about, and you all have probably heard this more than I have in my small realm. What about children who were in advanced classes? Everything was going great, then everything went virtual. Maybe the math has stayed steady or moved ahead, but maybe some of the topics that just weren't as interesting, or maybe the area of English or of social studies that was being studied changed from grade to grade, and we have a child or a student who was exhibiting advanced capabilities, but who has kind of lost interest and is lagging behind. How can we help those students at this point?
Yeah, it's a great question. Kids' COVID experience has been incredibly individual, depending on so many factors: their family's health situation, their family's response to the pandemic. Like, there's just a million variables there. For a number of different reasons, many highly capable learners, gifted learners, lost interest in pursuing areas that used to engage them, so may appear to have regressed in their abilities. My strong recommendation to parents: look at it as temporary. Let it be fine. Don't worry about it. Don't push your kid in the areas of their previous giftedness. It's not going to help, and it may actually harm sort of future engagement. Do look for activities in whatever area engages them. Look for things that they can get engaged in now. Make sure they have opportunities to continue with their learning, no matter what that area might be. So give your child a chance to feel confident and solid again, and trust that with your continued love, your continued support, in combination with some engaging learning options, they're going to find their way back at some point to their previously curious and engaged self. So at the same time, look for ways your kids' areas of interest might have changed entirely. Be sure to provide learning opportunities in those new areas. Kids' learning interests change over time naturally. That happens. A kid who can be a math whiz, who is a math whiz in the early years, might get pretty disinterested in math in middle school and become fascinated by music or science or something else entirely. It's okay. It's normal. It's okay. What's important for a parent to do is to let it be okay and not try to push the child back into what used to be their strength. Maybe you get some ego gratification from that area of strength. Well, let that go. It's not about you. So support whatever their new engagements are. Don't push, listen, respond to your child's thoughts and feelings.
That makes so much sense. It really does. And those changes continue on. Look how many times a college student changes majors once they kind of get there and figure out what's what and how it might apply to future plans. So yeah, it's only natural for it to happen, probably even more so in a younger student. So taking the flip of that, I have been joking with some folks about how on the, not really joking, but how on the one hand, we have many children who have sort of lagged behind, whether it's due to lack of technology or lack of structure at home, or, you know, number of issues that adversely impact learning. No pun intended here, but what about the students who have zoomed ahead? So you have a student who maybe was precocious with math, loved it, took a deep dive, knocked out those modules, and is now way ahead of his or her class. What do you advise parents to do in order to keep that alive and keep it going in a way that the school can realistically accommodate, and isn't going to put a cap on that enthusiasm and on that advancement?
Yeah, I mean, it is very similar, as you say, to the kid who's fallen behind, the kid who has zoomed ahead. Is another illustration of the highly variable individual developmental differences. Okay, and as you say, there's a whole lot of reasons for falling behind, and there's a whole lot of reasons, and similar and different reasons, for zooming ahead. So this is an area where the optimal match idea is really brilliant. It really works. It applies really well as a way to think about gifted development. So from an optimal match perspective, kids and adults' interests are dynamic. They change over time, responsively to different contexts, different opportunities. So of course, they're always changing. It's not static. Giftedness is not static, contrary to the way it used to be considered. So this is why it's useful to think frequently about the questions. What are this child's strengths? How far ahead are they? What do they need in order to keep learning and growing? I mean, that's very simply the foundation of the optimal match concept. So if a kid has zoomed ahead, you really need to ask that question. Okay, what's their level of interest and ability now? How do we match that? That child that you described who has zoomed ahead mathematically is probably going to benefit from some kind of mathematical acceleration and or enrichment. They may not be appropriately or well served in the regular classroom anymore in the math area. So the school, the parent and the teacher can work together to create some new options in the range of options that Optimal Match describes, to meet those changing learning needs. So lots of possible options for those circumstances of zooming ahead. The concept of optimal match really helps people think about that productively.
No, that makes so much sense. It really does. And I think it is important for the parent to sort of pick up on what the child's feedback is upon returning to the classroom, and to be a strong advocate for that child in cooperation with the school and the teacher. So that's wonderful. So Joanne, I have a question that's just specially designed for you. Through all of the COVID and in school and out of school and everything being so strange, I know I myself have experienced this, and I know lots of students have as well. What about change in effort and motivation? I think after being home, it can be very hard to kind of get back into that sort of the groove of getting up, going to work, doing, we've all sort of cocooned, and now we're sort of branching out. How can parents help foster their children's effort and motivation through this transition?
Well, effort and motivation are two great big topics. I could write books on those. I have actually, and I think that, to be very honest, to try to capsulate into 3 minutes is going to be tough, but I'll do my best. I can tell you, first of all, two words, and the first two anyways, and that is value attribution. And that means that if a child values a particular task or activity, there's a greater likelihood that they will invest effort, that they will be motivated, that they will be engaged in it. So that means that children require the appropriate challenge, the appropriate level of expectations, which they can actually help co-create sometimes, and to make sure that the task or assignment meets with their interests and ability levels. You have to pay attention to your child in context. So be willing to try different techniques, different optimal matches that may or may not work for a child, and move on if something is not quite right. Because if it's not motivating and they're not going to be invested in it, then they're not really going to learn as much as they could. Children can be helped to understand that learning happens incrementally, step by step by step. And sometimes it just needs that first step or that second step as a starting point, as a springboard for additional momentum. Encouraging them in the way of looking at their accomplishments, to feel confident, to feel good about themselves, and know that they can move forward. As a parent, not to get too involved, to ask questions that matter, to not hover all the time, because that can be counterproductive, but to enable the child to develop and let their independence grow. Call upon resolve, call upon common sense, model the kinds of effortfulness that you want your children to have by investing in your own learning and creativity. And making sure that there's development of specific skills that children might need help on. So for example, time management skills, organizational skills, prioritizing, making sure that distractions are taken away, because kids can sometimes go off on a tangent or go off track. Helping them learn to monitor their own progress so that they stay on track, and also to visualize success, because sometimes that concept of getting to that end line can be difficult, but if you can somehow see it and feel good about it, that can be very motivating. So effort and motivation, they're learning curves, and parents are well positioned to help children learn.
The thing that keeps resonating with me with both what both of you have had to say is that what we model for our children is so crucial.
Yes.
That when they see us putting something off or actively engaging in something, that behavior is going to be mimicked oftentimes. And so I think sometimes the parent has to start with him or herself in moving forward.
Yes, and if I can just add things like resilience, tenacity, persistence, a sense of purpose, the idea of collaborating with others if you run into difficulty, responsibility, all those things, patience, those are things that parents can model.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much. So heading back into school, and this is a COVID or non-COVID issue. What happens when we get back in school? And I know this varies country to country, state to state, but we look at assessment oftentimes, and we look at a cut score for gifted programs or accessing certain certain classes, or that type of thing. What happens when a parent knows that they have an engaged sort of self-starter, someone who really is passionate about things, and yet they don't make that cutoff score? Does that mean the test is bad? Does that mean that the child is not gifted? How much stock should we put in not making that cutoff, if any at all?
Right. Okay. And it is a very active question for a lot of people. I think it emerges out of problems with the model that is in place in many places, whereby there is like one test score that matters. One test score doesn't tell you a whole lot, except if it's very high, it tells you a kid is a good test taker and they really know the material. There are a million reasons not to do well on a test on any given day that have nothing to do with ability. A kid could not be feeling well. A kid could be worried about something. There might be something going on at home. Lots of reasons to score below a given test score cutoff that have nothing to do with, is this child gifted or not gifted? For me, that's one of the chief reasons that this optimal match idea works really well. So when you've got the sort of an IQ test or something like that, that's a one-shot chance to show how smart you are, many kids don't do their best in that circumstance for lots of reasons. There are much better ways to figure out if your child has gifted learning needs. And a parent who has observed that kind of engagement and learning and curiosity and so on with their child, I give a whole lot more credibility to that observation than to any test score I might ever hear. So some of the ways to find out if a child has gifted learning needs include subject-specific tests of academic achievement. The best way is observing the child day to day in a context of real world engagement in solving problems. It's a very complex topic. Assessment is huge. We spend 3 chapters in this Being Smart About Gifted Learning on this. So I think rather than talk any more about it, I'm just going to say, read the book if you're
No,
interested.
that makes perfect sense, because assessment is so multidimensional, and there can be so many influencing factors, and some people can go in and have a full battery, and some are trying to deal with just what's offered at the school, and so I suggest reading it as well. That's going to be far more informative, but I did want to touch on it before we break up for the evening. Now, I know both of you, have children, have grandchildren. You're lifelong learners and lifelong educators. How can teachers support gifted learning needs in a regular program? Both for the couple educators that we have who are attending, but also for setting some realistic expectations for parents in how that interplay works with the teacher.
So I'll answer that one, if you don't mind. I've spent decades in classrooms. I've seen teachers teach. I've worked with teachers. I love teaching. I respect teachers. And I think perhaps the most important thing to do in a classroom is to be respectful of diversity and welcome intellectual stimulation, to encourage children's creativity, reflection, inquiry, curiosity, and to make sure that the learning opportunities that are provided are well matched to their particular individual needs. And of course, children's areas of strength and weakness will vary. They develop at different rates and times. So it's always in flux, and a teacher's job is extremely difficult. And parents, of course, can help by advocating for more teacher development to help teachers learn some of the additional tools and tricks and so forth that will be beneficial for all students, not just gifted learners. We talk a lot about differentiation with respect to the optimal match approach. One way to differentiate is to begin by doing something called curriculum compacting. And this means that you consolidate or crystallize the content. You condense it in a way that a child indicates that they understand certain things, that they don't have to sit there and be bored or go over drill and repetition and so on. It respects their learning, and it frees them up to learn other things and to delve more deeply into topics, or to pursue their interests in ways that are more meaningful for them, because that goes back to that value attribution. If things are not relevant to them, if it's not meaningful and authentic learning, then they're not going to want to do it. Other optimal matches that might occur, it could come from cross-grade resources, where you tap into things that are happening in other grades within your school or within the district, single subject acceleration, flexible grouping, all kinds of leadership. Wonderful leadership opportunities are out there for students to become involved in. Learning about the brain and how it works, and all the different possibilities to look at discoveries and experimentation and hands-on kinds of activities. So there's another possibility. Reading. Endless possibilities for reading, guided independent study. There's something called project-based learning or problem-based learning, which is where students actually delve into a problem within their community or neighborhood, and they find out more. And there are also established systems or models of differentiation that we write about as well. These are ways of differentiating program that have been set up by professionals who really know their stuff, and who will provide guidance and frameworks and so forth. So again, in Being Smart About Gifted Learning, we have several chapters where we discuss optimal match possibilities, and we detail it. So again, this is like a 3-minute tip of the iceberg, but there are lots of opportunities in the regular classroom.
So having been in the classroom, would you say that it would be a positive step for a parent to maybe give a copy of Being Smart About Gifted Learning in a kind and, hey, I'm here to help you, I'm not here to make demands kind of way? I know, teachers have it so hard, especially right now, and the last thing they want is, to have yet more demands. But if delivered appropriately, you think this is a good plan?
I do, because you want to help teachers in terms of their planning, in terms of doing meaningful assessment, in terms of being able to provide relevant activities, in terms of motivating learning environments. All these things are important in order for children to thrive, and that's what we discuss in the book. So absolutely, yes.
Wonderful.
Well,
No, that's,
maybe,
sorry.
because it is 478 pages or something. It's a long book. I think what I would do if I was giving it to a teacher, understanding that teachers typically are very overworked and stressed, I think I would maybe do a little selection and choose a few pages. I think this might work with my child. Do you want to take a look at that? Like, I don't think I would give it to them and ask them to read the whole thing. I think that would be too much. But you could sort of encourage them to do that through sort of a thin edge of a wedge. Here's a
I
bit.
like that. Here's a Post-it note or two, and hope they dive further in. And
Yeah.
I think that because it is a long book, but it's well worth it.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because I don't know whether you said dive further in or die further in.
Dive,
I hope so.
No. We don't want teachers
No,
dying. This is not good.
Wasn't our intention.
Sorry, exactly. No. I need to enunciate a little more clearly. So what do you recommend for parents when they think their child may be gifted, or perhaps they even know by virtue of outside testing, but the school does not seem to be acting on that? Any suggestions for parents?
Okay, I'm going to make it really fast because we're running out of time. If a child has had an assessment, I mean, the first thing to do is to bring that to the attention of the school, right? So the child's been identified as gifted privately. Well, then you want to share those findings with the school and see what you can do about making sure those learning needs get met. If there hasn't been an assessment done, you can always ask for it. Whether you get one done at the school or not varies a whole lot by jurisdiction. Here in Ontario, it's the law. If you ask for it, you get it. It might be slow, but you're going to get it. And yeah, you can, as you suggest, get a private assessment done. It's another option. It tends to be expensive, but it's a good option. Whether or not you decide on an assessment, you can informally support your kid's gifted development. So your concern is the kid is gifted, the school isn't doing anything. There are a whole lot of extracurricular kinds of things you can do with children to keep them engaged in learning until perhaps the following year or the next stage. As they move into middle school, things tend to get better. You can look for a mentor, you can look for online learning possibilities, you can consider homeschooling. It can be part-time with your child attending school part of the time. In some jurisdictions, again, this varies a whole lot from one place to another. Some jurisdictions make it very easy to do a very, flexible, good, intelligent homeschooling approach that's partially integrated into the school and partially at home. Other jurisdictions are impossible, and they're sort of punitive. A parent decides to homeschool, they make it impossible and difficult. So it varies. So you can do it part-time, homeschooling, or you can do it for a limited period of time until you can find another environment that works better for your child. That's the short answer. There's lots more.
Exactly. Joanne, you look like you want to say something.
I do, but I ask if you have another question.
Well, Donna nicely segued into what I was going to ask next, which is, what options might be available? And you listed off quite a few, Donna, that have nothing to do with school, but that if you feel like your child has gifted learning needs, what can you as the parent do at home to address those needs, that's separate and apart from school?
Okay, so the number one is a safe environment where they feel secure and able to learn, and their well-being is respected. Being attuned to your child's needs and listening and observing and being patient and just being there to answer their questions and provide guidance. I think it's really, really important to work alongside the school in partnership, alongside with the teacher, and collaborate and let your child understand that that collaborative piece is active between home and school. Be respectful of your child's individualism, what it is that they like to learn, how they like to learn, variability of their understandings, and their desire for independence, autonomy as they grow. We started off talking about challenge and change, so making sure that we pay attention to that as well, and how we are modeling the kinds of things that will strengthen and empower them through these times of challenge and change. Especially within your own family's constellations of circumstance, because everybody's family is of course different. Modeling lifelong learning and resourcefulness and effort and motivation. So demonstrating that growth mindset that Donna mentioned earlier, and reading a copy of the book. I mean, that would really help parents, I think, if I do say so myself, and I just did.
All right,
Lily?
there we go. Yes, thank you. The book itself, while we've joked about its length, don't let it intimidate you. You don't have to read it all in one sitting or even in order. You can go through the table of contents because it's so it's broken down into sections so nicely that you can find something that applies to whatever situation you're being faced with at the moment. And a fair amount of these pages, not too much, but they're considerable resources and endnotes in the book. So don't let the size of the book frighten you. It's really helpful, and it's easy to find what you're looking for. So it's a great book. It is fully revised. This is the third edition, right?
Yes.
Congratulations to you all. I do want to let participants know before we thank our authors, I do want to let participants know you will be receiving notice before anybody else does of a optimal match challenge that we are throwing out there because we're very interested in feedback and to hear about how things are working or maybe not in the classroom, but we classroom or at home for your child. So you will get sort of a flyer about that within the next 24 to 48 hours, and then we'll extend it out further. This has been recorded, and I'm assuming everybody can see up in the left-hand corner that it's been recorded, but we will be making this available. So if you have friends, family members that you think would like to see it, just have them get in touch with Gifted Unlimited. You can just info@giftedunlimitedllc.com. And we will make sure that can happen. So I want to thank Donna and Joanne so much for being here. It is just, I love the book. Having this time with you has been wonderful. I really appreciate your generosity and your time. You know, it's 8:45, depending on where you are. And so thanks for kind of rushing in right after dinner. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wally. A pleasure.
Pleasure.